Hello, my name is Matthew and I'm a strategic systems consultant here at Quest. And in this video, I'd like to talk about a specific feature of GPOADmin called synchronization. The idea behind synchronization is that it allows you to take a source policy, and whenever that policy is deployed, to update one or more target policies. In this way, the settings between those policies are always kept in sync, and you don't need to worry about drift between different policies. This is useful for dev test prod methodologies. It's also very useful for security baselines when you're managing kind of a multi-force or multi-domain environment where there's a set of policies with security controls that should always be identical no matter what the environment. So let's take a look at what it's like to actually implement synchronization. To begin with, synchronization is hidden in GPOADmin behind a kind of a feature flag. So I'm going to right click on one of my instances here. I'll talk more about that here in just a second. I'm going to go into options, and in options, go down to options in general. You'll notice that there is a section here called enable group policy object synchronization. This is not turned on by default, so it is something that you can turn on, and what that does basically exposes the UI of GPO synchronization. Now, in this circumstance, I'm going to be synchronizing from one forest to another, and there's no trust between these two forests. I have a GPOADmin instance inside each forest. So that's kind of the link we're going to be taking. So firstly, I'm going to identify a source policy. Sure, we'll use workstation configuration. Now to configure synchronization, I right-click, go down to the Synchronized menu, and do Set Synchronization Targets. Now the thing with Set Synchronization Targets is this requires there be a target policy to set to. When I launch this, it's going to open into a blank window, and by default, it is homed to the GPOADmin server that I'm on. So if I right-click, choose Add Synchronization Target, it's going to enumerate all the other GPOs that are in this particular GPOADmin server. That's not actually what I want, though. I want to synchronize across a forest. And the first thing to know about GPO synchronization is that GPO synchronization will not create a GPO on the target. We actually have to have a GPO to synchronize to. Let's go ahead and create one. I have two connections open in the same console here. I have a connection to the GPOADmin server where this console is installed. Basically, we'll call this the source domain. And then I have a connection across a forest as a different account, in this case, Muppets Administrator, talking to the GPOADmin instance in a separate forest. So I'm going to go ahead and expand the version control system in that forest. We'll go to Security Baseline, a container. I'm going to right-click, choose New, and create a new group policy object. To keep this simple, I'm going to call this the same thing, although this wouldn't necessarily have to be named the same. Click Next. Enable our settings. Click Next, Next, and Finish. Now we have a checked out policy. I'm using kind of super admins here, so we're kind of going past all the usual approval requirements that might be in place. But if you're using this and doing this process as a normal user, those same approval processes must occur. We'll check this in. That'll create version 0.1, and then we'll deploy this for version 1.0. At this point, there is now a GPO in the target environment called workstation configuration. Let's flip over to that system right now. If we take a look at the group policy management console, we can see that there is a brand new policy created as of just a few seconds ago called workstation configuration. It's empty though, there's no actual data in it. So let's flip back to our source GPOADmin server. So now that that's there, I'm going to go back into my source version control, go to the GPO's container, right click here, choose synchronize, and set synchronization targets. Now in this particular case, my GPO is on another server. So what I'm going to choose add server and create a connection to my other GPOADmin server. Now it is important to know that the connection that you make here, the account that you use to do that is the account that's going to be stored inside the synchronization profile. So this may be something where you want to have a kind of maybe a specific account set up in the target environment that you use to do the synchronization work. All right, so now I can pick between two different servers. I have Kermit selected here. I'm going to add a synchronization target. You can see it enumerates the policies that I have registered in my target environment, which is workstation configuration, the one I just made. We'll click OK, and now that adds that into kind of my target table. Now I could add more GPOs, so I can do a one-to-many kind of synchronization here. But first, I'm going to go ahead and just leave this as is. And the most important thing to do in here is to set your target state appropriately. So when the source policy is deployed, we need to choose what happens with that target policy because it's going to push those settings. But what state of the object that's going to be is something we need to choose. By default, it's going to be checked out, which means that we deploy in the source and you'd have a checked out version in the target that has those settings. You'd have to go into the target, check in, and deploy. Or you can set it to available. So available sets it to basically checked in. That'll be a 0.1 version. That's what I want to use. I find that's a good middle ground because it's there, it's available, it's 0.1, it's kind of ready to go. But there's also pending approval, which is similar to available. And what that does is it checks it, it goes ahead and pushes the settings, checks it in, and then requests approval. So it's ready to be deployed, whenever. So it'll go ahead and send out the appropriate approval emails. Or if you're truly bold, you may choose deployed, which basically just pushes it straight into production. Most of my customers don't do that. We're going to choose available. Now there's a couple of other settings in here worth noting. If you need to update the credentials that we entered here, this is where you go to do that. You can manually kick off a synchronization, which is nice, particularly if you're kind of testing or you just need to do that. And additionally, you can, if your target policy includes like security filtering, for instance, or within the policy there are other security principles set, we can set a migration table to be automatically used. A migration tables just simply uses Microsoft's migration table technology. It doesn't work for everything. It doesn't work for things like group policy preferences, but for the things it works for, we're able to integrate that directly within the workflow. And finally, we can also set the WMI filter. So if you use a WMI filter, of course, that's going to refer to an object in the source. What we can do is we can either automap by name. So if you keep your WMI filter names consistent between the source and target environments, it'll automatically use those. Or we can just simply manually select a WMI filter. All right, this looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and save and exit this. So now that we have a synchronization set up, let's go ahead and make a change in the source environment. We'll deploy it. We'll see what happens in the target environment. I'm just going to choose a random setting. check that in. Now this is going to become version 1.1, and we still haven't pushed anything into the other environment. That only happens automatically on deploy. So I could go ahead and make further changes to this without affecting the target environment, hence the dev test prod type of a concept. So I'm going to go ahead now and deploy this into production. And again, because I'm an administrator, automatically approve those changes, and you can see that it's synchronizing with the target group policy object right now. So what we'll see is version 2.0. And if we take a look into our system here, you can see this has become version 1.1. I could take this and we could run a comparison between the two, version 1.1 and version 2.0, and we'd find that they are just the same. Let's do that really quickly. Select both of those services. Another really nice thing you can do when you aggregate multiple instances of GPOADmin together is do reporting across environments. So we'll select both of those, click next, and we'll do 2.0 and 1.1, and we'll show all settings. As we take a look, there'll be some changes there, but fundamentally, those are all have to do with permissions. The actual settings within the policy, as we scroll all the way down, you'll see that those are absolutely unchanged. You can see here's the actual setting that's being set. There will always be differences, even with synchronized policies, because of 80 and SysVol versions, which are included with those reports, as well as the actual like security filtering, because they're referring to permissions, in target domains versus source domains. It's perfectly normal. But fundamentally, the settings are going to stay the same. So now in my target environment, I could go ahead and go through that release process. That is synchronization. One final thing to mention, and I should have mentioned this at the top, this particular demo involved synchronizing objects between two different instances of GPOADmin. Works great. It's a fantastic way to sort of provide some integration between force with no trust between the two of them, for instance. But GPOADmin is just as capable of synchronizing source and target objects within the same GPOADmin instance. So if you have GPOADmin configured, that's managing 6, 7, 8, 9 domains in a single forest, maybe you have a single instance of GPOADmin that's managing domains in an external forest because it has the right trust relationship. That's perfectly fine. The nice thing about that actually is that you don't have to specify an account because it's going to just use the service account within GPOADmin itself. So yeah, absolutely. That is how GPO synchronization works. Thanks.